you had given us the choice between all of the players that we could have paired into, this might be the team we wanted. We got to play against a favorite of ours from the Pacific Northwest, Osius, and we wanted his team. They were the most lovely and wonderful people possible. We got up to the table and we did pairings against them, and they had some unorthodox lists that I don't think played well into us. They had almost nobody that could deal with Bile. They had nobody that could deal with Gennari. They just really had some pairing issues that we were able to exploit in the pairing process. If you guys have never gotten a chance to play Lou Rollins, I'm sorry, because it is amazing. He is funny and he is kind and he makes dad jokes that are awful and I just adore. Unfortunately, no matter how good Deathwatch are at dealing with the Xenos, what did he keep calling me? Filth? Scourge? He called me a lot of things, yeah.
They got a lot of words for not Imperial.
Yeah. So they, but when it comes down to it, it's like there's like 50 Marines on the table and I just killed them. And then they were dead and the game was over.
What did you do with the second turn?
So my round 4 was against Charles Met, and he was playing Bile, which is awful for me because I am pure combat Tyranids. But we knew this going in. This is what we should have been doing on our first day. We realized later that my list is the one that can play everything close. So just bust me into everything. Just throw me under the bus in every single matchup, and I'll take whatever they've got as their killer, and I'll get you a 10-10. And this is kind of what lined up for this round. So when you're nothing but combat and nothing but trade pieces, and your opponent couldn't care less because everything fights on death, it's virtually impossible. I pulled as much jank as I possibly could out, and I still lost the game 11-9. I think I was like 1 point off of a 10-10. But I knew the rest of the round was going well, so I wasn't too concerned about it. I was trying to keep him off his primaries, keep him away from his secondaries, but I just ran out of steam at the end because, again, everything that I sent in that's supposed to be able to kill, overrun away, and not take any damage in return died on contact. So there wasn't really much that I could do about that. Even with using things like a paroxysm or mass hypnosis to try and stop things from actually having an effective swing back, it still wasn't usually enough. I also distinctly remember my psychic interrogation just flubbing every turn. Like, I rolled a 4. Okay, denied it. I rolled a 4. He denied it. I rolled a 9. He rolls an 11. Like, oh, okay, fine, sure. I guess I'm just not going to get psychic interrogation. Gotcha. But it's still a great game. And even though I knew I should lose or tie, it was still satisfying because I knew the rest of the team was doing well, and I was basically fulfilling my purpose.
I played against Chuck Burns, and if none of you are familiar with him, he is fantastic. He also runs a YouTube channel. He was one of the best opponents I've played in a long time. We had a hilarious time. So, wonderful opponent. He was playing Custodes. Pretty cool list, mix of bikes and dreadnoughts. And I was actually a little concerned going to this one because of the dreads. And I tend to be, it's a bit of a coin flip whether I can take down the bikes or not, given the invuln. And it's a lot of wounds to chew through. In this case, he looked at the table, he looked at the secondaries, and he made a gamble of his own. He figured if he could get aggressive enough and sort of kill enough on turn 2 that he might be able to take the upper hand and just keep me off of my shrine. In this instance, he killed the targets he wanted, but it took too many resources, and then I had 3 units of Repentia standing maybe 6 inches away from all of his stuff, which led to me obliterating everything in the middle of the table. And he knew from then on it was sort of just fighting for points, but he had been a little bit too aggressive on that first and second turn, really, but it gave me the win in basically turn 2. We played it out. It's still a tough match because my Seraphim and Zephyrim really bounce off almost every target in his list, and the Dreads actually sat and held objectives longer than they had any right to. But it was a really cool game. I just think that one over-aggressive play, the overextension, really cost him.
I got the honor of playing Osius. One of my favorite opponents from the Northwest area recently, or I guess in the last year or two, it moved away. So pretty excited just to get a chance to hang out with him. And then I saw what he was playing. He's playing all close combat orcs, and I'm playing Bile. So sort of knew right off the gate that like he was going to try to make moves, and we were going to make unfavorable trades against him the entire game. It took one round of me jumping everything he had on an objective and killing it all, and him retaliating to kill my guys and then seeing all his guys die before he was like, oh, I see. This was a bad matchup. We played it out and we had a good time, but there isn't much that close combat orcs, they're a full forced rush list, and Bile just eliminates them. So I managed to end up the game 149, bringing home no prisoners, specimens for the spider, and long war at 100% on each of them. Stopped counting specimens at 20. It was just disgusting.
Great opponent, great looking army. I have a lot of reps into Harlequins. He definitely used every trick he could. The best part of that game, in my opinion, was on turn, I believe it was turn 2. I had my big knight go up, and I said, this is the big knight. This is your one turn to deal with it before it runs through your army and causes grievous damage. And he's like, well, I'm going to go. He didn't say it, but what he chose to do was ignore it. And then it proceeded to run through his entire army doing grievous damage. It killed like 4 units by itself. And then he was like, oh, I really should have listened to you when you told me that I needed to deal with that big knight. And I said, yes, that is true. And so he ran out of models on turn 4.
So yeah, what we basically saw was a bunch of us don't really want Bile. We probably could play it close, but we were able to get Bile into Alex, give that Alex Bile. And then that allowed us to set up the rest of the matchups to be favorable and get the team a 77-23, continuing us on a great path. At this point, we're looking at the standings and we're saying, hey, we're 3-1, and there aren't very many teams that don't have a tie or 2 losses. And we're beginning to see ourselves get to some rare air and getting pretty excited. So for round 5, we got Smite Club Vegas Vacation, and looking at the pairings matrix, we realized that their Necron list was going to be a difficult time for either Jesse or myself, but that everyone else felt like they had either a tie, either a 10, or a favorable matchup into most of the rest of the field. So if we could just avoid Jesse and I getting those pairings, we should be in a good position. So we used us as defenders, giving both of us the chance. I only had 1 bad matchup, and I think that Jesse had 2 that he didn't want. Anyways, that's how we did it. Is we basically made sure that we didn't get the 1 matchup we didn't want, which was the 2 of us getting Necrons, and that managed to pair us into a very favorable setup with them. I really liked my sister's opponent. I thought that he really had a unique grasp on the army. Our game, the thing about sisters, though, is not only do I play sisters, but I have a ton of practice into them. And my personal belief, Jesse may disagree with me, but my personal belief is that Eldar are just a terrible matchup for sisters. We have a lot of AP. We're very fast. The indirect firing D cannons don't make the matchup any better for the sisters player. And so what I was able to do is position myself really strong and kind of a castle on my side of the table and just shoot his high priority targets with D cannons, forcing him to engage a little bit closer, which allowed me to counterattack. There was one big turn where if I remember to take armor saves instead of invuls on a troop unit, the Incarn doesn't die, and instead the Incarn does die. So I could have actually gotten even more points. But the reality here is just that sisters want to survive by touching cover and having armor of contempt. And when your army is focused on dealing with Marines, you have a lot of AP4, AP3 in combat with tons of attacks and multi-damage. It's just really a rough time for the sisters player.
So I was up against an orc list with triple kill rig and Gaz, and it was an interesting game. Very combat heavy on both sides. I think I may have actually respected the kill rigs a little too much as far as my positioning is concerned, but I haven't played a ton against orcs just because they haven't been that popular for a while. But the real key to the game was, again, we were on Dawn of War, so I am not quite able to kind of spread out like I would like. I was able to put a lot of pressure on, but then since he didn't have to be all over the place, he was able to kind of pile into the pressure that I was handing him. And then there was one turn where I had a really important interrupt. That was kind of going to be the big swing. Like, it was a crippling of a kill rig and killing off another kill rig. And then it just whiffed. Like, I got to the point where I had wounded the kill rig with only 2 wounds left, and he made 4 or 5 pluses, and it lived. And that killed all the warriors off of the objective. And that was this huge swing in points. But again, we knew we had paired well, so I got a 10-10, and all said and done, like, I had to play my ass off for that 10-10 with the things that went wrong. But I knew the round was already good, so it was solid.
My matchup is the flip of Colin, so I got to play Yanari as sisters, and it can be a tough matchup, but played super cagey, it can work out. This one came down to some kind of weird, kind of crazy moments. One pretty critical one, we had to get a judge, and the opponent was lovely. Neither of us knew how this was going to work, so we called over a judge to just make a fair ruling. But when the Canoness went down in his psychic phase, the rule says to leave the model there, and we weren't sure whether the remaining smites would go into that Canoness or not. The judge ultimately ruled that the remaining smites would go into the Canoness, so he wasn't able to smite the next thing over. That meant Celestine was still alive into the fight phase. She ultimately went down in the fight phase and didn't stand up, if I recall correctly. It was a thing that had been going on all weekend for me, but that was a pretty critical moment in terms of just damage output and shifting things in my favor a little bit. And then I think secondaries is a pretty big one here. He took Scry, which was tough for him because in an Eldar Sisters game, you're both killing a lot of the other people's resources, and when you have to go to an objective and do a psychic power with sisters around, suddenly it gets really scary to put that Farseer or whomever out in danger. So he couldn't do that. There was another moment where he needed a really important Harlequin charge into my Retributors with Vol rerolls, and I ended up wiping them out in Overwatch. He needed the charge, so he had to go for it, but that meant he wasn't going to get onto the objective. Things went in my favor.
For my round 5, I got to play into Don Husin, somebody who I've been following for years and years. I've played many of his lists and always been interested in what he was doing, inventing in the Chaos space. He took the leap and made a Chaos Demons list with I think it was 5 days we had to test and build lists for the deadline. He Be'lakor, because everybody brings Be'lakor. Then he brought Scarbrand and Fate Weaver with him as well. Only 3 flamers, like 1 3-man squad of flamers, and 5 squads of bloodletters and some trash to hold objectives with and such. We talked a little bit before starting the game, and he was of the opinion that he could use Fate Weaver as sort of his ranged, and he would hold back from me, and he would just wear out my army by tossing Mortal Wounds into it. I think it was pretty reasonable concept-wise. As he started to do that, I moved the Terminators forward and popped all the benefits onto them and shot Fate Weaver. I did like 10 wounds to him. It turns out it doesn't matter if you have a 3-up save that's invulnerable. Well, I'm just going to shoot a bunch of bolt guns at you. It does plenty of work. From then he had to start being more cautious with Fate Weaver and couldn't really get the mortal wound damage in he wanted. From there, you can experience the rest of it based on one of the other games we talked about. It was all close combat. It comes into me. I kill it. I go into it. I kill it. Right? Like I win either way. I don't even have to play well. I just push my pieces at them and they disappear. I think probably the most important part of that was I kept my my psychers close enough to roll denies, and then I made sure I was really disciplined about my CP so I could roll 4-up denies with Abaddon or the bikers from the Corn units to make sure to block the Infernal Gateway, so he couldn't get 3 mortal wounds and 3 mortal wounds to everybody within 3 of that squad. Otherwise, you could really hit the Terminators and then hit all the characters in the Terminators and try to wipe them out. In the end, I won that game 84-37. Any of these games where you're playing Bile and you get to push into the center and nobody can do anything about it, you take all the primaries and it's just like, how many secondaries can I gather before my opponent is dead? And this very much felt like that.
The Necron matchup is something that I'm greatly familiar with for a variety of reasons from people who know me. This is the match where I'll say, I killed everything. It was effectively over on turn 2. I went first, picked up the Silent King, picked up a few other units. He moved some stuff up the board, killed a couple things. I clapped back and then was in his deployment zone with multiple units. And then he said, "Oh, this game is over." And I said, "Yes, it is." And then we just wrapped up a little bit of round 3 scoring, and then it was over. It was the shortest game by far and probably the most violent.
So we put Alex into that very unknown matchup, and because we did that, and that meant that we managed to get the Necrons basically off of the rest of us. It meant that the pairings went great for us, and we really did what we were supposed to do. Jesse got the close win. I got the bigger win. My list was more built for sisters, probably. Yeah, it was just a really solid win, and we sat watching the leaderboard trying to figure out who we were going to get for the 6th round. In the 6th round, we thought we would be playing for like 4th or 5th spot, because we thought that there'd be somebody who is a number of people that are 4 wins and a tie, because that's not uncommon at a team event. And actually, as it happens, we were playing for higher than that. We really just needed to get a lot of points here. 2nd place was absolutely possible, but we needed to really get the points. So when we did the pairings for this one, we actually were more conservative than we had been the whole tournament. As an example, you'll see in the matrix that for the first time in the tournament, we have a question mark on Chuck into the Tyranids with the Harpies. Chuck just said, honestly, I haven't played that matchup. I don't want to mess it up. If I have to take it, it's probably fine. But I don't want to take a matchup I don't know well in this spot. And I think that was a wonderful thing to say. And so we just treated that as a 0. We said, okay, fine, that's not a pairing we're going to do. And then as we look through, Jesse felt like he had a close game, maybe a potential small loss into that Tyranid and Harpy list. We figured that I would be okay. But then what we really identified was that both both Michael's Chaos Knights and Jesse's sisters don't want any part of the Emperor's Children list. And so because of that, we have a situation where they have someone in their pairings that we're really afraid of, and we need to try to bait them out. So what we did is we used Michael and Jesse as our defenders, because then they always get a choice of 2, and neither of them will have to take the CSM list. The worst thing that could have happened there was that Jesse gets given CSM and Tyranids and has to pick between them, which I believe is exactly what happened. So that meant that Jesse had to go to the Tyranids, but we had a 9 there on the Matrix versus we had a 0 for him on the Emperor's Children. It's just too hard for sisters. And so what that meant is that we had to, the way the pairings all worked out, it meant that I got into the CSM. And remember that my Unari list is specifically designed for that matchup. My round 6 opponent was another absolute favorite opponent I've ever had in 40K. We had just a wonderful game. We set up, we hid really well. I got first roll to go first, and he had actually put his Terminators not behind the wall, thinking that the D cannons are indirect. What does it matter? And I'm going to hide the D cannons. And so I moved the D cannons out into the open to get better shots, because if I go first, he's not trans-hitmaned, which means that I can get some Rangers in, have the units start doing some blast 9s into the Terminators, and get 3s and reroll 1s. Or reroll all on one of them, rather. I did that and managed to kill 6 or 7 of the Terminators on the first turn. The rest of my D cannons, whiffed ridiculously hard into some possessed. But I did also take a middle objective with my Harlequin bikes, trying to bait him forward. He matched my aggression by running at me. I saw him run at me, and I decided to run at him in return, and then he ran at me, and I ran at him. If I pull back early, this is probably an even more difficult game for him by the amount of damage he took in the early turns. But I played aggressively and went after him. I'm not sure why, but that's the way my brain decided to do it at the time. Looking back, it doesn't make a tremendous amount of sense to me. I needed to play the range game more, but at the end of the game, I had one Harlequin bike with 1 wound left, and that bike had ignored all reasonable math on dice rolls for armor saves, and then one Howling Banshee. Everything else in my army was dead, and my Farseer with 2 wounds left. and he had one noise brain hiding behind a wall in one of my objectives. So an incredibly bloody game, but the reality is that my secondaries were to kill him and his secondaries were to do things. And I said, no, you're not going to do anything. We're only fighting. And since I brought only violence to him, he didn't get to do things that weren't violence. And I only chose violence. And so that's why the win was so lopsided, despite the fact that we absolutely murdered each other. Of all the games I played at Las Vegas Teams, this is the one that I wish was recorded so you all could have seen it. It was really quite something.
So I went up against Grey Knights for round 6, and this was something I was relatively competent into. I've played Grey Knights a few times, and I think it's a pretty good matchup for my list. I should mention that my list is designed specifically to go second. I mentioned this in the first round. I happened to go first 6 times in a row. I never went second. It was the first time that's ever happened, and it was so disappointing. But anyway, in this one, I was playing pretty hard for points. I knew that this was where we were going to really push for whatever our final rank was going to be. I was able to do a cool little maneuver with the Saboteur by throwing her into the middle objective. And the Saboteur's specific rule is that she's in terrain, then you have to be within 12 inches to shoot her. So I was specifically putting her there, hopefully dragging somebody out. And he made a couple of weird walls to defend himself from charges and try and get some damage into her, because that was going to get me a 12. And he didn't make the wall correctly because he just blanked on the fact that the Kraken can go as fast as they can. So he made a wall, if the board is your big rectangle like this, he made a wall here, and the Raveners literally just crossed across and hit what I wanted to get. And that was a pretty critical swing for me. I was able to take away his primary. I don't think he scored primary until the last turn, actually. I think I zeroed him on rounds 2, 3, and 4. And that was really how I made an actual difference in the scoreboard. Other than that, it was the usual of most of my stuff is dead at the end of the game, but the score is heavily in my favor.
I was playing against a really fine gentleman named Brian for a Leviathan Nids list once again. Tough matchup that I'm solely looking to play close. Do not ever think it's going to be a blowout in either direction. And that's what I went for. What happened here? Same as game 1. I hit everything that I could via strategic reserve. It ended up paying out very well for me once again, giving me opportunities to take out his key units later in the game when I would usually be running out of steam. So that was great. And he used his harpies more as a disruption unit, sort of putting mines in a lot of key areas to control movement, which is great. One thing that I was very happy with, though, is he took banners, as most Leviathan players do, but in this case I think he had Hormagaunts in his list as well, and put them a little bit too close to me so that I could pump up some Zephyrim and throw them with some buffs, defensive and offensive, onto the middle of the table, get rid of those Hormagaunts, sort of slow down his scoring and slow down the rest of his army so that they were fighting my Zephyrim in the center and not being able to use all their assets. That slowed him down. That let me control a little bit more of the table, control a little bit more of the primary, which ended up being very close on primary and anyway. And this is where secondary choice comes down. I think a lot of Tyranids players like to take grind against sisters, and it doesn't work out particularly well for them because we're going to kill a lot. And then he also took assassinate, which once again I can control the speed of that if I would like to, and I do. So I end up winning the game on secondaries. Primary was pretty close. Great opponent though, really really fun game. Close on everything except for the secondaries there.
All right, for my last round, I got to play Randall Nelson playing Necrons. We're very excited for me to get this matchup. We looked at it and we saw it was Necrons, but it was all close combat except for one unit of low crush destroyers. And boy, did I learn a lot. Coming into this matchup, I didn't really process through all the math of what happens when one of my units hits a unit of 10 Lich Guard. What happens is they don't kill them all. And if I've already fought and then they fight, I don't die. I don't fight when I die. So a couple of times I bounced into him. I killed a couple of Lich Guard or 5 Lich Guard, and then they fought back and they killed a bunch of my guys in return. And then he would res a few, and then you res a few more, and then you put one back with the Technomancer, and then like the squad's back, right? So I came at this game really incorrectly. I needed to hit unit to Lich Guard with everything I have all at once and wipe them out. Instead, I ended up with units of Possess getting wiped out to kill 1 or 2 Lich Guard, and then my Terminators spent 3 turns locked up with a unit of 10 Lich Guard, just slowly grinding them out. And that Terminator unit is really Abaddon's bodyguard, which means that Abaddon had to go and leave his bodyguard and try to go make some plays happen to keep me in the game. And he came up 1 wound short of killing the Silent King in that process. And then over time, he was able to push Abaddon down before the Terminators got loose. And so slowly, my game started to kind of fall apart. The key learning here is that close combat is a great matchup for Bile. A really durable opponent isn't a good is not a good close combat matchup. So I needed to look at that and understand what it needed to do to totally wipe it out. I'd never had a matchup similar to that, so it was really a learning moment at the time where I didn't want to learn. Right, final round of a tournament, you don't want to have surprises. It played out well. I got close. I lost it 57-89, which is a 4-16. If I had played it like I'd been playing other Necron players, it probably would have just been a 10-10. But I assumed I'd be able to blow through him, and that was just not the case.
I actually loved this matchup into the Eldar. It was all Wraithy stuff with some of the D-Cannon support batteries, 3 Wraith Lords, some things to hold the board, a couple bike people, a couple casters. And I can't remember quite what else, but I do remember how durable it was and that the D-Cannons did quite a bit of work. I actually lost a War Dog on the charge into D-Cannons because he used the auto 6s to hit for the Overwatch, which was something cute that I wasn't aware of. And then I got unlucky and lost War Dog, so that was cool to learn. I did not go first that game, but it didn't help him. And basically, by the end of turn 3, everything that mattered was dead.
So if you look at the matrix for this on us, we actually thought we would do a 64 into this team based on what happened. But we got Chuck's game incredibly wrong. All of us were wrong. Nobody saw it coming. And at the same time, I overperformed my game, and Jesse overperformed his game by actually winning it instead of losing it and getting 3 more points. Michael predicted a 15, and got a 20. So everybody overperformed what they expected to do except for Chuck. And we only expected Chuck to get a close game of like a 10. So he got 6 points less than we expected him to get, is a better way of looking at it. But these guys were great, and it was a wonderful final opponent for us. And then we sat around to find out that we got 3rd place. And we're really excited about it.
All right, guys, for Best General at the Las Vegas Team Tournament, we've got 3rd place, Best in Tabletop. Yes.
I think my biggest takeaway from teams is that you have a lot more freedom in your list building. You can go into more extremes, which I'm not sure is anything that we really took account for. We really kind of did just bring 5 singles lists, and you can bring in the weird stuff. You can bring in the skew stuff, because the stuff that will punish you, you shouldn't get. And I think we learned that in the pairings, that we can just go weird, go wide, do some strange stuff. I think we'll have a lot more fun with it, and it'll be more refined next time we go to a team event, which is going to be a lot of fun.
So I would say my biggest learning for the team tournament, in this case with Sisters in particular, is without creating those mega skews or taking my list in a different direction, and as a take all comers list, I didn't have many matchups looking at the matrix where I thought it would be a blowout, and in fact there were a lot of unfavorable matchups within the meta lists that existed there, so I could have skewed my list, I think, differently to create some more of those sort of dynamic scores, because you need to do that. I think there is something to be said that in most pairing situations it felt like, you know what, I'll play this close, so I could be sort of Johnny on the spot might be the wrong term, but someone who you could reliably say, okay, it's not going to go calamitously wrong except for Necrons or Bile, etc. And that was key for me. So I think next time I would definitely change up the list and go in a particular direction with it rather than to take all comers. And generally speaking, it's nice to be able to look left and right and see how things are going and see how hard you have to go, or if you can ease up a little bit. It's great.
I think the biggest thing we learned at the tournament, I think you already mentioned it, but it's really interesting, is we slowly shifted our pairing process to avoiding bad situations. We either wanted to even out every game or try to get places where we were spiking and then evening out everybody else, as opposed to trying to spike a bunch of times. And I think that really changed how we were seeing the game and also really improved us as a team. I think that's the big thing we took away from this particular event.
I think that like others have said, the pairings process is really the big thing where we learned, and I think there's a lot more thought that could have gone into whose lists are designed to play close and who is just a hammer. You know, if Michael's Knights get caught off guard in a bad matchup, it's a 0, right? And that my Eldar did the same thing against Tau. So I think we could have thought a lot more about that. I also think that even though the meta is very close combat heavy, we took 4 close combat lists basically, and that was probably wrong. I think that not having Necrons held us back. Necrons are strong in so many matchups, and they're not really that hard to play. We could have had somebody play them. I think if I had played Necrons instead of Yunari, we would have probably gotten 2nd place instead of 3rd, just as an example. So I think that we could have done more to matching our lists to the meta, but at the same time, we benefited a lot from our knowledge, especially of my list and Chuck's list and Alec. Actually, everybody, really. Everybody had a ton of reps with their lists, and so when we did pairings, everybody gave incredible information that was accurate. You know, the worst person was probably accurate 4 of the 6 rounds, whoever that would be. Like, nobody was wrong a lot. So that's probably what we do next time, is look more at how the lists go together like a puzzle. And so when somebody comes in, you don't want them to be like, oh, well, everybody just doesn't want this guy. You want it to be more nuanced than that. So yeah, guys, that wraps us up. We are just ecstatic about getting 3rd place. We were hoping for 2nd after we lost to Gentleman Gaming, but we were just ecstatic to get 3rd. 3rd is, you know, in that group of people with how good our opponents were, it's just incredible to do that well. We're really, really happy, and we're excited that we're going to do ATC and Las Vegas Teams Tournament at the very least every year, and we're going to keep making content for y'all. So if you guys could provide us feedback and let us know if you like what we did here. I know that parts of it are rough. I know audio's not great everywhere. I get it. We're trying a new thing, and we're doing it for the first time, and we're going to keep doing it. So thank you all so much for your support and for the kind words about how we did at the tournament. And a very special thank you to our wonderful opponents. Not one person had one bad game the whole time we were there. So thank you, everybody. And we'll be back with more content soon enough.